is my friend and colleague, Carol Offer. She and I were MSW classmates here, and she is working for Search now and knows a little bit about the homeless population and about social policy as it affects the homeless in our community. So is there something else you would like me to share with you about that?
That sounds good.
She's like from New York. She's lived here for a while. She lives in Montrose. She's a good person. I love her, and I'm really grateful she's here today. So I'm going to go sit over here out of the way.
Thank you, Anne, for inviting me. So, you know, when Anne and I talked about me coming and talking about this topic for a policy class, I was asking, you know, what are the students like? Is it a macro class? Because I'm not macro. I'm clinical. I'm definitely clinical. And she said, no, it's clinical. And so my goal is, I mean, there's objectives that you'll see on the next slide because that's what we do. But my goal is that you're sort of sitting there getting like how, as a clinician, you're going to feel policy impacting your involvement with your clients on a one-on-one basis. And towards the end, so there's all this stuff at the beginning that is policy, but at the end, there's going to be an opportunity for you guys really to try to imagine things based, you know, I'll be presenting policies, and I'm going to encourage you to think about how this might interact with your, when you're engaging with an actual client. Okay, so we're going to talk about homeless policy today. There we go. So today's objectives, as you can see, and I really hate reading from PowerPoints, but it seems like objectives are things that you read. You're going to, at the end of today, you should be able to identify just 2 federal policies related to homelessness, define chronically homeless, not homelessness, but chronically homeless, and to discuss some ethical considerations related to federal policies that impact people who experience chronic homelessness. So, Anne has given me a bit of an introduction. I'm a clinical case manager at Search. I work at a housing site that we refer to as Harrisburg. It's at the corner of Harrisburg and Sampson. I finished here in 2014. Many years ago, what brought me to Houston, I got an architecture degree, which might make you think that I've been working in housing and policy for 30 years, but I haven't. I just left out all that stuff, and I got a BA in psychology 31 years ago. And so what I do now is that I provide a full array of direct care services. So I do some counseling, and I do some SNAP benefits, right? I do the whole thing with a caseload, and it's a pretty steady caseload. And I'm working specifically with recently housed chronically homeless people as part of an integrated care team. Anybody know what an integrated care looks like? You want to share what that is?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, Houston sort of got together and said, instead of just dealing with different agencies that would each do a bit on housing, that they would take them housing first, and they would make sure that they had all the services in one place so that homeless people didn't have to go to different areas. Right, and so that's what it looks like in housing. So integrated care is it's a medical model, actually, where you have many different providers talking to each other to sort of provide wraparound services to a client. And it's really good best practice for people who are really struggling, you know, who have really fallen through the holes of the safety net. But it's good for everyone to be working with an integrated care team if you think about it, because you'd really like your internist to be talking to your surgeon, right? And maybe even your psychiatrist, right? It's like there's benefits that I'm sure you can imagine. So what I do specifically, because I work for Search, is that I actually office in an apartment building, and that's where my clients live. And yeah, so this is the building. This is the outside. This is, there's a nice big courtyard on the inside. Okay, and I wanted to show you this because it's really hard to understand what I do, and I really want you to try to get a picture of what I do. So yeah, I work in this apartment building. It just opened in February, so it's a really nice facility. I have some pictures of the inside. So this is our office. We don't normally have tulips. This is like a promo shot from the property management. And this is my desk right here, right there. And these are some of the amenities. There's a library, so there's like a big TV room, and there's a library. Back here, is there like a pointer? Well, it doesn't matter.
So back here, there's a kitchen that the residents can use. Here's a computer room. And this is some shots of the apartment. So it's an SRO, which means only one person can live there. And it's not a full apartment. It's a very, it's a very nice apartment. But the kitchen is limited to a microwave, a sink, storage space, and a full-size refrigerator. And if they need to use an oven, that's when they would go to the kitchen. One reason for that is that they found that stoves can be dangerous for people who haven't had a lot of experience working with them, or because their functioning level is not at the highest level. Okay, so I just want you to picture like it's a really nice place to work, it's a really nice place to live. Okay. So here are two key concepts that inform my work. One is permanent supportive housing, and the other is housing first. So I'm not going to read through this. I included this so that you would have it in the PowerPoint if you wanted to refer back to it. Permanent supportive housing is basically housing that comes with supportive services. And what the supportive services varies by program. My program, like I said, is an integrated care model. So we've got housing case managers, we've got a nurse, we've got a community health worker, and a behavioral health clinician. That's sort of my team. And we all office in that room that you saw, okay? Another big concept is housing first. So housing first is a policy that it's a policy that is aimed at quickly and successfully getting people into housing with very few barriers. So basically the barriers that our clients have is that they have to qualify for the program and they have to have their documentation. If there's somebody with a severe substance use disorder, that's okay. They don't have to be sober. If there's somebody with a psychotic disorder, that's okay. They don't need to be on medication. If there's somebody who's highly depressed, that's okay. They don't need to be on medication. Another way to think about this is if you've had, is anybody here interning in a psych hospital? Has anybody here had any experience with a psych hospital? Okay, so psych hospitals, if you're an inpatient in a psych hospital, I used to work in a psych hospital, I would describe it to my clients when I worked with them in outpatient that when you're in a psych hospital inpatient, this is the kind of support that you get, right? It's like it's a locked facility. Sometimes you're kept there against your will, right? It's very contained. Then you might move into outpatient, partial hospitalization. You're going there every day for a big chunk of the day. Then you start stepping down and you're there maybe 3 days a week, and that's IOP, right? Intensive outpatient. And then maybe you are done and you show up once a month for a support group, supportive, right? Supportive outpatient. Then you're done, right? And there's no supports left. So housing first allows people who our system will no longer keep, right, in a very close contained environment, or maybe the clients don't want to be in a close contained environment, they can live on their own, but we're there providing support if they want to engage with it. Does that make sense? So you can choose to engage with us or not, it's your choice, but we're there. And research shows that, oh gosh, I got permanent supportive, I sort of slipped back into permanent supportive housing. It doesn't matter. Really the takeaway about housing first is that there's very low bars to entry, and so we have people with a lot of challenges living independently, okay. Now I'm going to talk, this is like the macro part. Okay, it's not that many slides, so just hang on. So I'm going to talk about it from, it's just one slide, it's a pretty picture, federal, local, and people, right? So here it is. That's the scariest slide I've got, right? So over here, we've got federal policy coming from maybe the White House, HUD, right? Housing and Urban Development, maybe the Houston Housing Authority, which is funding from the federal government. Then we've got agency policy, and in Houston, the sort of umbrella organization for lots of different organizations serving the homeless is a coalition for the homeless, and then my agency search, because I can speak from a search perspective the easiest, and then that is informing interactions between people, right? Whether it's between me and a client, the clients and each other, the clients and property management. So it does trickle down, and again, this is where I want your heads to be at. but we do want you to learn something about this level. So that's like the worst slide. Just for your information, so you have this. Ben Carson is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I'm seeing a chuckle here at the front row. I don't know what that's about. And there are two laws, right? There are two laws that we're going to be looking at. It's called, by shorthand, is the McKinney-Vento Act and HARTH, the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing Act. Okay. So McKinney-Vento has a lot of parts to it. There's pieces that impact HUD. There's pieces that impact education, health and human services, labor, agriculture. If any of you are parents and your kids are in public school, you probably get, which I am, you probably get a form at the beginning of the year that you have to fill out. It's asking about, are you a migrant farm worker, and the stuff about lunch. Like, a lot of that is making sure that they're capturing kids who are homeless, and I don't mean capture. That was terrible. They're, yeah, they're embracing, they're providing services because, okay, there you go. But also, more than just identifying, they're getting services to kids who are homeless, because part of McKinney-Vento is making sure that those kids are getting food and they're not excluded from being educated because they're homeless. So these are super important laws. Don't worry, I included this so that you have it. I just highlighted in green the ones that are really relevant to the chronically homeless. So McKinney-Vento, it defines homelessness. It funded some demonstration projects for supportive housing. And it impacted the development of these SROs, right? So that some hotels could become SROs. So basically providing less expensive housing options for homeless people. Right. So this one I'm including because it talks about healthcare for the homeless. And remember, I talked about the integrated care team that I'm a part of. Search does not have any medical staff. There's a healthcare for the homeless organization here in Houston called Healthcare for the Homeless Houston. And we work very closely with them, and they provide the sort of medical staff. And down here, I highlighted this one because of the way that it makes sure, sort of like the kids in school, it makes sure that homeless people are getting their SNAP benefits. Okay. But there's a lot here. And then the other act, which you can see came a lot later, 2009, so I don't know the math, 22 years later, right? 80, yeah, 22 years later, it redefined things. And have I lost anybody? Are we still here? You're okay? Not too much macro? Okay. So
you're probably hugely grateful because I do far too much macro for them. So
okay.
You're doing great.
Okay. And I have no idea what time it is, and I don't know how long this presentation lasts for, so
Just
I might run out of time or not. I don't know. So I'm including this one so that you can see what's in it if you want to. But the big takeaway that I want you to see is that it codifies into law the continuum of care planning process. And remember in the slide, the scary slide that had federal and then local and then people, I said healthcare, I said homeless coalition for the homeless, right? They're the umbrella for the continuum of care system. And this is basically the system of organizing all the services and getting funding for it. So it's super important. They put it all together into a more manageable system. And they also broadened what some funds could be going for, because this was originally called emergency shelter grants. And basically what happened is through the years they saw, and you might have heard this, that shelters are a very inefficient way to house people. It's super expensive, and it doesn't get them housing, it gets them shelter. And is anybody interning in any of the shelters? Okay, if you talk to people who are staying there, a lot of them find them extremely unpleasant to stay in. I'm not dissing the shelter system at all. It's not what Search does, and it's an important part of the system, but it helped to broaden the use of funds, which has been extremely important for the whole system. Yeah, okay. Okay, now we're getting into the direct care part. Okay, so when the rules change, right, it impacts the people. So what I want to focus on for a while here is the definition of chronically homeless, okay? So I want to be clear, search does not work with people who are homeless, who have been living hand to mouth, and then one of the providers in the family loses their job and the family moves into a car for a while. And maybe the provider gets another job, but it's lower paying and they can't pay rent. That's not who search is working with. Search is working with the people who are living under the highways, right? Who when you leave here on your way home, if you can, look underneath the places that you haven't noticed before. Look in the trees, because that's who search is working with, right? And that's who, when there's a lot of public outcry that makes the middle class uncomfortable, that's who's making the middle class uncomfortable, right? The people who are camping out by Minute Maid Park, the people who are like living among the trees on the highway interchanges, right? So those people are likely the chronically homeless. That's who we're talking about. So I want you to not think about this broad idea of homelessness. I want you to get really, really, really focused on chronically homeless. And there's a specific definition for chronically homeless, which was originally identified in the Hearth Act, which was the later one, right? The later act. Again, not going to read the slide. This information is going to be brought back, but I wanted you to have it. Okay. In 2015, a new revised definition of chronically homeless was developed. Okay, and so what we're going to spend some time doing now, and you're going to do the work here, is think about what happens when the definition moves from chronically homeless is defined as someone who's been homeless and living or residing in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven, or in an emergency shelter continuously for at least 1 year, right? Or on at least 4 occasions in the last 3 years, to, being in that situation, homeless and living or residing in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven, or an emergency shelter, continuously for at least 12 months, or on at least 4 separate occasions in the last 3 years. So sounds familiar, right? Where the combined occasions total a length of time of at least 12 months. What's the difference? What's the impact? So now let's just say we call it navigation. So navigation is when you're working with a client who has not been housed yet, right? They're living in a tent under 59, or they're living in the Cloverleaf off of Wa, right? You're working with them to try to get them into housing. And in order to qualify for permanent supportive housing, they have to be chronically homeless. The rule used to be, until it changed at the end of 2015, it became effective like January 4th of 2016. What's the difference? Did you get me? You got me a marker. What's the difference?
That when there's 4 separate occasions,
Uh-huh.
it has to be longer, or at least 12 months. Or before.
I just did something bad. Whoops.
Give me the clicker and I'll fix it.
Thank you. Sorry. So go ahead.
So the separate occasions have to sum up to 12 months. Where
Okay.
before they didn't have to be that much longer outside. Like not outside. I'm still sleepy. But
No, you're doing good. Right.
So before
So 12
the
months.
separate occasions didn't have to sum up to 12 months. Yeah.
Right. So that's, okay, excellent reading. It's a lot of words and it's like, what? Right. So then what does that mean? How does that impact somebody? What does that do? Go ahead.
That means that you have to be without shelter and security, which puts you at more risk for a longer period of time.
Potentially, yes. So you're saying because it didn't used to require the 12 months,
Right.
now we're saying it has to be 12 months. So it has to be 12 months, where before it could have been what? It could have been
3 times that didn't add up to 12 months.
right. It could have been 3 times that add, or it's 4 times and 3, right? 4 times that added up to a month, right? Go ahead.
So basically, you've just raised the bar and cut off a whole population
Right.
from accessing
Excellent, right. So, okay, oh, I just want to draw that on, okay, so you said it increased amount of time homeless. And you said, you know, raise the bar and cut off some number of people who would have met the criteria before. Criteria. How about prior criteria? Okay, yeah. For those of you who just walked in, you're totally fine. I know I got caught in traffic too. It was awful out there. Plus there's some weird stoppage on Cullen, I know. Please don't use your phones or your computers during this. You're going to get this presentation. We're really geared towards a direct practice level, so yeah. Okay, so yeah. So now we've identified that what this rule change did, what this definition change did, was it raised the bar. It made it more difficult to qualify for permanent supportive housing. Thoughts about that? Now I want you to put your direct care, right? It's like you're talking to a person. I see you, I see you. You're talking to a person, and it's gotten harder for them to qualify. Okay, so what does that bring up in you? What does it bring up in you? Like, sit for a minute with that, check on your gut or your heart or your arms or wherever you feel stuff. What does that bring up for you as a clinician now that the bar is higher? Okay, I'm like, shout out emotion words. Frustration. Did I hear sad? Angry. This is clinical. Come on, you're my clinical people. Useless, okay. What else? Anything?
You literally may have to tell somebody you haven't been homeless long enough for me to help you.
You literally may have to tell people that they don't qualify because they haven't been homeless long enough. You're absolutely right. So you might have to deliver some really devastating news. Any other thoughts or feelings?
I would say
Defeated.
not being able to help.
Okay, so it feels like, and then I'm left and they're looking at me and I'm like, sorry, I can't offer you anything. And that feels really awful, okay?
Fearful.
Afraid, fearful, okay?
It might put you in a little of an ethical dilemma also, thinking, you know, the person is presenting me saying, you know, I wasn't really homeless for this amount of time.
Uh-huh.
But you're thinking, if I report like that instead of what they told me previously, then they won't qualify.
So I could bend the rules and nobody would know.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to put all the information, because we have these like forms.
But then you're on the line if it comes back to you.
So it could become an ethical dilemma for you. I love that you said ethical dilemma. Any other thoughts or feelings? Did Anne plant you? Did she tell you to say that? Any other thoughts or feelings? Okay. Hopefully the next slide is, yes. That was perfect. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It just so happened that yesterday I was at a conference with a former, like, super awesome, fabulous, famous instructor from the GCSW, and one of the things that she presented was some steps in making ethical decisions. So I inserted a slide into my presentation. We're only going to talk about these because these are not sort of as relevant, right? This is where I really want you guys to think about, I really want to hear from you. Okay, so the steps in making ethical decisions, right? Oh yeah, something weird happened with the PowerPoint. Okay, so first you have to identify the problem or the dilemma. So what's the dilemma? What's the dilemma here?
Do I write down the accurate amount of time that the person
Whoops,
is
shoot, sorry. Okay, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I want to get sort of a broader view, so step back a little bit. Because the ethical dilemma that I want you to think about is not so much I want you to put a meso hat on, so not a macro hat, but not a direct care hat exactly, okay? So not so much.
Individual, but like as an organization, do we service people who may not meet the qualifier that the government has set?
Okay, so that's one way to see it as an ethical dilemma, right? So do we go against, do we, like push back? Do we push back against the rule? Okay, so I can tell you this. My agency is part of the continuum of care, right? It's a body that works together. I can't tell you if it's on consensus or not. I don't know how they make decisions, but they make decisions as a group and there's buy-in. And the buy-in is we want to get the federal funds because it's millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. So we're going to do what they say. So that is an ethical dilemma. It's not really the ethical dilemma that I want you to focus on. Go ahead.
How do we serve people who do not meet the criteria? How do we connect them with some kind of resource to lessen
Okay.
their situation?
Sorry, let's see. So, okay, so the system is a system. It's not a singular entity. There are other agencies that do different things, right? There are other agencies that provide emergency shelters. So emergency shelters are available for you if you're homeless today, right? If my house burned down and even if I had resources, and I showed up at the Salvation Army sort of early enough to get a bed, I could get a bed, right? So there's a very low bar to entry for that. So the system has not a great way to deal with it, but there's a way to deal with that. Okay, go ahead.
As social workers, I feel we have an ethical responsibility to serve the vulnerable and the underrepresented.
Okay.
And for me, the dilemma is how do I do that in a system that creates barriers, like
Okay.
providing that service to the vulnerable.
Okay, I love, again, Anne didn't know that, but it feels like you were planted to use the word vulnerable. Yeah. Because the continuum of care has identified for the city of Houston, like this whole consortium of organizations, they've come up with their definition, what works for our city, what makes somebody vulnerable. There's something called the VI, which is a vulnerability index, okay? And they have criteria. And so, I'm not an expert on this. I want to say that the highest vulnerability initially was veterans. So veterans got the sort of first spotlight put on them, and then I can't remember. It's like, and then I don't know if it was physically disabled. I can't remember, but they came up with criteria so that everybody who goes through the process of being assessed for housing gets a VI, and then the top of the VI list, those highest numbers, they're getting housed first. So let's talk a little bit more about when you change this rule, right, and you've made it more difficult for people to get housed, what does that do, or how does vulnerability interact with that? What do you think about that? Who's getting served better? Because I totally hear you guys. I get it. It's like, what? You've made it harder to get services. That's not right. Everyone was sad, angry, frustrated, scared, right? I totally get it. But now when we start thinking about who's vulnerable, I could have given up my apartment and I could have slept on Anne's couch for a month, and then I could have gone to Salvation Army and slept on your couch for 4 months. Could have gone to Salvation Army. Then I could have slept on your couch for 6 months, gone to Salvation Army for a week. Did I get 4? And then I could have slept on your couch for 8 months. So that would have been within 3 years, and I was homeless 4 times because it's in the system. I was at the shelter for 4 weeks. So I could have qualified.
Are there any provisions for women with children or elderly?
So there, again, I cannot remember the criteria for vulnerability. I will tell you that it's kind of interesting, but the numbers of women versus men who are chronically homeless are very skewed. There are far more men than women. And there are specific shelters for women and children. And I'm not sure that there are any for men and children. And I'm not saying that it's a great system. And women do end up in PSH, but there are a lot fewer who are in the chronically homeless category. I don't have all the answers because I'm a clinical person, not a macro person. So, yeah. But so vulnerability. So I would have gotten housing under that old rule, right? I would have gotten into PSH under that old rule, or I would have counted as chronically homeless. I wouldn't have gotten PSH because I'm not disabled. But
so now you're getting the people who may have been overlooked by the system before?
yes. Okay. So say more about overlooked.
Because
Do you like that? How I'm like, you know, giving like positive reinforcement when somebody's getting close? Yes. So overlook. What do you mean?
they maybe would have been considered like their problems so chronic that they were helping people at that mid-level
Yeah.
instead of helping the people that were really at the bottom of the system.
Yeah.
And they weren't catching those.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Because what I think and this, so remember that was a federal register rule change. So that was informed by not Houston people. That was like the national homeless provider community informs a lot of this policy. And I think that's really important to touch on. And in the very last slide where I give you some other agencies to sort of look at, we'll talk about it super fast if we have time. But yes, so the feedback was, wait a minute, this is kind of too loose. And we're not forced to get the most difficult to engage with. Because the way that it had been, and listen, it's like never easy to move somebody from chronic homelessness into housing. I just want to be really clear about that. And if I'm being kind of glib, it's only because I'm trying to move this along. But it's like, so I have a client, Rose. It's not a real name. I have a client, Rose, who I navigated into housing after lots of people tried. Somehow with me, you know, I'm not a particularly good navigator, but somehow with me, like, she showed up enough that we got it done. Part of it is because I'm on this integrated care team and I can get into people's medical records, and accessing medical records is an important part of being able to get a Social Security card. Don't ask. You need your Social Security card to get housing, okay? She wasn't showing up, she wasn't where she needed to be. I had enough sort of extra access to stuff that I could get her a Social Security card, and then she could get her Texas ID. And you need those documents to get housing, because the property management won't lease to you. She was not being housed under the old rule for, you know, I mean, it's her own issues. It's not the fault of a navigator. But if there's somebody who's showing up for appointments and they've been able to hold on to their Social Security card and their Texas ID, and then you have somebody who's not showing up for their appointments, they don't have their Texas ID, they don't have their Social Security card, and you're under the gun for getting people housed, who are you going to house? Are you going to house the person who's showing up, or are you going to keep trying to find the person who's not showing up, right? Does that make sense? And again, it's not that this person doesn't deserve housing. It doesn't mean that they're a less worthy person. It just means that this particular program, remember I said, my focus is they're chronically homeless. This particular program is trying to help the most vulnerable. These people, not this person, the Roses of the world of Houston. Not the, yeah, you tell me when to be there, I'll be there, right? So this made it more difficult to qualify, but it also assured is probably too strong of a word, increased the likelihood that we were getting the most vulnerable, right? So my husband, who's in marketing, uses the metaphor of low-hanging fruit, right? You're trying to sell, nonprofit arts management, he's trying to sell tickets to people who want to go to a concert. He's not trying to sell tickets to people who couldn't care less about the concert, right? He goes for the low-hanging fruit. This rule change was saying we can't just house the low-hanging fruit, because the chronically homeless, the really difficult to house ones, they're still homeless. They're still on the street. How does that sound? Okay, take a moment, check inside, check your stomach or your arms or your heart or wherever you're feeling stuff. And now start, let's hear. What are you thinking? Feeling. Anything?
Urgency.
Urgency, okay.
I'll write feeling words on the side.
Thank you. Look at her. Feeling words.
Apparently I'm doing the clicker too.
Oh,
'Cause
thank you.
Every time I let you have it, you.
Did I lose
So
it?
weird. No, I got
Sorry.
it. I got it over here.
Any other feelings? So urgency, anything else?
When you put it that way, it sounds not as harsh.
Okay, not as harsh. So you're a little bit more comfortable now that you understand something about the broader system, the way that the definitions are impacting things. Okay.
So like relieved, maybe? More comfortable?
Frustrated still because, and I may be wrong and data may prove me wrong, but I have this sense that if you can stop people from getting homeless in the first place and letting it get to that chronic stage,
Uh-huh.
then you might actually have a lower level of homelessness. So I feel that it's not wrong to necessarily try and house the chronically homeless,
Mhm.
the people on the bridges,
Mhm.
but I feel that you're going to have more people coming into that pipeline
Right.
because we're not hitting it off. So I would feel frustrated with this. as
Right.
well.
I totally get that, and I wouldn't disagree. I mean, right, I haven't researched it, but that makes perfect sense. To think that avoiding homelessness at all costs is going to help in the long run. We're not there. We're so not there, right? We're so not there, and we're not getting there anytime soon. We're trying to help the people right now who are chronically homeless, who are fitting this definition of chronically homeless. And maybe we should just talk a minute about what you think is going on with people who are chronically homeless? Just throw out some guesses. So remember I said it's not the person who was working, maybe they were working 4 jobs to make ends meet and they lost one of them and they can no longer make ends meet. That is not who we're talking about. We're talking about the person who's living under the highway for an extended period of time.
I would probably that it can seem a little hopeless in the sense that you're talking about people who don't necessarily want to live in mainstream society. So you're talking about people who sometimes prefer the lifestyle that they live. I have watched this, I watched this show and it was Addiction or something. And the guy he was in special education where they separated them from the main people, right? From the main students, he was separated.
Mhm.
So he felt like he was outside of school, but outside of the class of people or mainstream society when he was a child in school during his time. So when they found him on the street, they said, "We're gonna get you housing," and he was like, "That's not what I want. I don't want to fit into society. I don't want that." So they gave him he agreed to do 30 days in regular or 90 days in regular mainstream society. He did it. He went sober. And he did it. When he was done, he was like, "Look, I did it, but I don't want your life. I don't want to pay your bills. I don't want to live in society. I don't want that." So.
Yeah. You're totally right that there are definitely people who do not want these services. So we have the bulk of Search's non-administrative staff works in jobs like mine, right? They work in apartment buildings or they have offices in apartment buildings and they work with recently housed chronically homeless people. But we have a section of our staff who does mobile outreach and does navigation. And mobile outreach, bless their souls. I mean, if you intern or you come to work at Search, part of what you do for your onboarding is you'll go out in the van with them. They drive around the city. So the continuum of care has sectionalized the city, and there's different areas where different agencies are finding people. And what they do all day long is they drive around and they talk to people who are not engaged in navigation. And it's really, that's what you're talking about, that there are some people who don't want to be housed, and that's their right. And so they are in constant conversation with them using motivational interviewing to try to support them in some way that improves their quality of life. You are absolutely right. And there are a lot of clients, so I'm not sure if you came in a little bit late, but we talked about the Housing First model, which all the permanent supportive housing is based on, which is There's such a low barrier to entry that people do not have to be sober. They don't have to, have to be taking their medication. Where I am working, the property management doesn't allow sex offenders in, but felonies, people with felony histories can be housed there. So it's a very low barriers to entry, other than documentation, which is often a pretty big barrier. Okay, yeah.
I work with rapid rehousing.
Okay.
And
good. You know more about that than I do. I don't know anything about rapid rehousing.
yeah, and we use the Housing First model, and as a case manager, it's very challenging.
This is so perfect. Excellent. We're going to get there. So at the end, we're going to talk about some of the challenges, and one of them is Housing First and the ethical issues around working with an individual when you're in a Housing First model. So I'm so glad you're here.
Okay.
No, I really am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you would feel, I don't know, proud or like feel, because I'm kind of trying to compare it to, sometimes I work at MHMRA, and sometimes it's hard to engage with clients that don't show up for the appointments, and those are the ones that we need to reach out and engage with them, because those are the ones that are needing the services more than the
Right.
ones that show up every
Right.
time for the appointment.
Right.
Those
Right.
are doing good.
Right.
Those are getting.
Right. That's sort of a parallel system.
So if I
Yeah.
kind of compare that
Yes.
to the ones that have been homeless for a long time, they've been.
Right. Right. And one of the things that we see is that, so the majority of my clients are between, let's say, 45 and 70. So people who, like, I don't know how old the person in the video was, but a lot of times people have made a choice for a variety of reasons that they don't want to be in society, but then they get too old. I would still be out there, but I realized that they were going to kill me if I stayed out there. I had my campsite, blah, 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 and then the guy showed up with a machete, and I realized, well, I used to be able to fight him off. I can't fight him off anymore. So our population is typically people struggling with co-occurring disorders, which in this case, when I say co-occurring, I mean substance use disorders and mental illness, typically serious mental illness. A lot of, I don't know what you know about bipolar disorder, but there's a pretty broad spectrum of how it shows up. So typically it's not somebody who's managed the first time they take a Latuda pill, right? It's like these are people who have psychotic features and have taken a bunch of medication and it doesn't work for them and they would rather not have the medication, right? Can I have the clicker? Oh. Yeah. I feel like I got a little bit lost. So I need to turn and look at my PowerPoint because we're way past that. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if we did this or not. Yeah. Right. So decrease the number who are eligible. It potentially increases the number who are homeless, right? It increases the dire health consequences for those who are unhoused. And maybe the public is going to lose faith in the whole continuum of care system, right? That's possible. You said there are going to be fewer homeless people, but it seems like there are more homeless people. So this is going back to that ethical decision making, right? So these are potential issues involved. But you've also identified the upside, which is that now, from an ethical standpoint, maybe it's more ethical to make sure we get the Miss Roses housed than the people who show up, right? Like you were saying, the people who really need it versus the ones who are okay. Maybe, right? Okay, you don't have to worry about this slide, but step 3 of ethical decision making was to review the relevant ethics codes. So I did a little work for you because I'm pretty sure that none of you know all of the NASW code of ethics off the top of your head. I certainly didn't. So I pulled out what seemed like the relevant issues, right? The relevant code of ethics issues, and I threw them up for your consideration at a later time. I don't think it's that helpful to read through it, but I just wanted to do the process. And then the fourth part that I did was to know the applicable laws. So this is the comparing the two definitions, right? So on the one hand, I just wanted you to think about, like, how do you think through this? And there's not an answer, right? There's not a, well, this is right and this is wrong, because as you can see, there's like an upside and a downside to both. Yeah.
Ryan Ellis, who's also with Search. And
Yes.
Yeah, he said one of but there's no documentation that they've been homeless. And so even a member of the public
Yes.
can hand in that documentation. So if you have a guy that you know, I mean,
Yeah.
I know a couple of homeless people around the place that don't want to be housed, and we have our, monthly chats and
Yeah.
chat to each other, and they tell me where to fish, and I learn all sorts of things. But then you know who they are. So if they ever want to go and apply for the housing, then you can actually write a letter saying, I've known this person for 5 years, they've been homeless this time.
Yep.
And so then they can actually qualify.
That's absolutely true. It's not for everybody, right? That would have totally freaked me out before I started doing this work. But I have a client, I'll call him, I don't know. Bob. He's very much not a Bob, but I'll call him Bob. He was living somewhere near a guy who he referred to as Bubba. He didn't have a phone. Bob didn't have a phone, but Bubba did. And Bob, when I was navigating him, gave me permission to speak with Bubba. And I would call Bubba and I would say, hey, he didn't show up. Or Bubba would call me and he would say, did he show up? Because he told me he was going to show up. Because he was living somewhere near Bubba and Bubba wanted him housed. He did not want him there. But he had enough of that inclination to help him and not just sort of get him to leave. And so it was super helpful to have that support in the community, right? And this documentation that you're talking about is when somebody is saying I'm chronically homeless, there's basically two sources of information that we have. One is something called HMIS. All these different organizations that are part of support for homeless people have to enter data into HMIS, Homeless Management Information System. It's required by HUD. So if somebody has been in a shelter, I can see it, and that counts towards that 12-month, that definition, right? And people in the public can sign paperwork that says, I know this person to have been homeless in this location for these months. So that's definitely true. I thought you were going to say, he said to have them, try to access. But yeah, that's something that but that's something that you can do without them saying, without them doing anything. You can record it if they're open to it, and it will help them. And they'll just need to have your information so that they can reach back and have you provide the documentation. Does that make sense? So that is something that you can do. I'm glad that you brought that up. Okay, so just finishing that first four steps of the ethical decision-making model, you need to know what you're debating. So what you're considering here are these two definitions. Okay. How are we doing on time?
Fine.
Give me a little more.
Well, you can talk as long as you want, really. It's 10:20.
Okay.
So you've been going for, well, maybe not as long.
How are you guys doing?
Good.
You're doing okay? Okay.
Typically, we go an hour and 15 minutes before we take a break.
Okay. So when is a break?
So that would be 9:40. That'd be 10:45.
And where are we now?
10:20.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So that gives you 20 minutes or so.
So I put up some other things that I've thought of that could be good sources of conversation in here. Here are 4 different policies. The Housing First, which, who said Housing First? My rapid rehousing friend here, right. Okay, so Housing First, the guest policy at the at the apartment building where I work. Search's decision to focus on housing case management because Search used to provide day services, and using an integrated care model, which is another decision that Search made. Okay, so I guess because we've got a rapid rehousing friend who brought up Housing First, we're gonna talk about that one first. So why don't you share, again, Housing First, the details of that policy are that it quickly and successfully connects individuals and families experiencing homelessness to permanent housing without preconditions. This is the big part, without preconditions and barriers to entry, such as sobriety, treatment, or service participation requirements. Okay, so you want to come up? You want to come up and give a little talk about what you see as your concerns about Housing First? Yeah. So I should give her the thingy thing? You have a mic, because they're filming it for 3 people who aren't here. I don't know. I did it. You can do it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you're not going to click it.
Yeah, I'm not. Do I need to hold that? This?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think it's around.
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So with my agency, we're part of like the Rapid Housing, which is like a subgroup of Section 8, everything that's like an umbrella under HUD, and that's Housing Urban Development, I believe. So basically with Rapid Housing, we use the Housing First model, and clients don't have to have a job, they don't have to have anything really, they just need to have paperwork that says, a homeless documentation is what we call it, that says I'm homeless and I'm currently residing at a shelter or a place that's not, habitable for, people to live in and stuff. And basically we work with young adults and we work with families as well. So like she said, there is age limits. Like if you're a young adult and you're 26 and you don't have a child, then there's not much we can do for you. And that's kind of like that gap that's there, because there's a population where males are 26 or females are 26 over the age of 25, and they're just stuck in this loophole where no one is giving them services. But now with Rapid Housing Families, they're trying to say that we're going to start giving individuals who are over that age and who don't have children a chance to be a part of the program.
So what do you see as the problem?
Yeah.
What is the ethical dilemma around Housing First?
So
say they don't have to have income or anything.
They don't have to have income or anything. So the problem that I feel like I'm working in, sometimes I feel like I'm working in circles, because we'll meet with property managers throughout, like all over Houston, and they'll ask, okay, well, they don't have income, so they need to make 3 times the rent. How are they going to apply? Where's this money coming from? And they're like, oh, well, you guys are a voucher program. We're not a voucher program. So it's just like when you're working with the Housing First, like using that policy, it makes it harder for the case manager, because you're like, okay, I need to talk to my client about where they're going to get money from, but they haven't worked in 5 years. So that's a challenge. Then some of my clients have substance abuse. So, and then they have trauma on top of that. So it's like, okay, once we do get them into that apartment, it's like, okay, well, you don't have to go back living under the bridge anymore. You can live in your apartment. But they're like, I don't feel comfortable there. Something might happen. So I'm just going to go back to the bridge. And it's just like, no, you have a home. That's why we did that. So that also makes the Housing First, the Housing First, I see like that policy is very ideal, but I feel like with that policy, they didn't think about substance abuse and how people want to go back to what's comfortable instead of going to something that's new. And then another issue with the Housing First is property managers are starting to realize that, maybe this isn't the population that we want to lend help to. They're starting to be resistant, because they're starting to see like, oh, well, that client, they just come in, they don't pay their rent here, you guys are helping them, but all they want to do is sit outside and drink. All they want to do is, do drugs. I see people, coming in and out of their apartment. They take their friends that were under the bridge and bring them to that apartment, and they're not on the lease. Like, that becomes an issue, too, with that Housing First policy. Another issue that I feel like it's not okay, and I don't know if that's also with the Housing First, is the type of apartments that we put the clients in. Because clients have felonies, clients have all different kinds of crazy backgrounds, and we don't look at that. We don't look at that at all, but apartment complexes, they look at that. And when they see that, they're like, oh, well, he has a felony, so we can't work with him. But, when you're part of the Rapid Housing Program, it doesn't matter, but to them it matters. So we're having to put them in apartment complexes that has mold issues, they have rat issues, they have roaches, it's roach infested, bed bugs, anything that's wrong with that apartment, you name it, they have that issue, So we're putting babies in those type of conditions, and it's like, it's the streets or this apartment. It's like, what battle do you want to pick with that? And like, it becomes kind of tiring sometimes, because you have clients where they're calling you like, hey, like there's mold everywhere, and my child has allergies and they're sick, and there's a rat, the rat bit my child. Like, you have all these issues, but then we're focusing on like, okay, did the rent get paid? And it's like, wait, this isn't working, So yes, we're using the Housing First policy incorporated with the Rapid Housing, because we want to get them housed as soon as possible, but this policy isn't addressing the issue that's arising from the apartment complexes and the trust that we have to establish with these clients to make sure that they stay housed. And the thing is, sometimes they don't stay housed. Like, sometimes they'll leave the program and leave that apartment and just go missing all over again. And that policy doesn't address how to combat that. Okay, I hope I...
No, that was, I think that hearing it from a colleague as opposed to an outsider probably is more convincing.
Sorry, I had a question. There's no minimum standards, no compliance with Housing First?
So I think the key is, Housing First is the model. It's not necessarily all the policies that an organization has in place to work with a client, right? So, let me flip it around, okay? So I grew up in an apartment. Nobody from property management ever looked at my apartment. Nobody who we didn't invite into our apartment ever looked at our apartment, right? Like, you know, friends came to our apartment, family members came to our apartment.
But these are apartments contracted with the federal government, right?
These are paid for through HUD money, yes. Okay, so it's your sense that they should have to do more than I should have to do since I paid for, or my parents, whatever, paid for my apartment versus somebody who doesn't have the means to do that. I'm not saying you're right or you're wrong. I'm just saying, like, that's what we're saying. If
I'm saying there should be an oversight body
okay.
from the federal government that implements and oversees that these apartments have minimum standards for these people
Okay.
who are housed there.
So I can't speak to her specific program, but I know that because the programs that I've been in have had Houston Housing Authority Section 8 vouchers. Like that is the governmental oversight, and they do have that. They do have required inspections. There are state required inspections. There's lots of things that are in place. Certainly not a perfect system. I don't know if your program, as it happens, my property management, where I work, they're actually an excellent property management company. They keep their properties super clean. They have pest control coming in weekly. They're more obsessed with bed bugs and roaches than our clients are, for sure. And people have gotten evicted for not having a clean enough room. I want to try to focus a little bit more on this part of the Housing First piece, which is your neighbor doesn't have to be sober or taking their psych meds. What if you moved in and you had a severe substance use disorder, and for you, moving into that apartment was like a life-changing godsend, and you were ready to try sobriety again, your 8th time. But this time you're housed, which does provide you a more stable living environment, and so it does increase possibly the chance that you'll stay sober, or you'll stay sober longer. But all around you, people are not sober. So before, I just want to point out, before you guys were not comfortable with making the chronic homeless definition more stringent, right? That felt bad to everybody. That we were saying it's harder to qualify for permanent supportive housing, right? And now we're saying you might be wanting to be sober, but nobody around you wants to be sober. What do you guys think about that? Are we okay with that?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. So I have a client, Mr. A. Mr. A has been dealing with his substance use disorder, severe substance use disorder, for 21 years. And he decided, he's 51, he doesn't want to live like this anymore. But he's got an addiction to crack cocaine and his new dealer lives down the hall from him, and he offers him free junk, right? So what should happen?
I feel like it shouldn't be a either or, but just,
Okay.
I mean, in the ideal world, you would provide more options. So you have, those clients that maybe have it a little bit more together. You can offer sober housing or housing for families. I know they won't let people with sex offender or sometimes certain type of felonies live with these people that have kids. But at the same time, if you aren't all together, we don't want to just exclude you from the program, but you just have different options. I feel like that would be the
So more options sort of in the housing community, in the chronically homeless, the permanent supportive housing community, so that somebody who's sober can choose to live there. Somebody who's not sober is like, oh, I'll live here.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about the guy who decides he's ready to try to be sober? Because I hear you, and I would say that actually what seems to be happening is the opposite, which is that they're trying to create housing for people who are not sober, like so that you can go there. I mean, which is kind of a backwards thing, but
we want to house, we want to say that you're housed.
Right.
So we're not going to require that.
Right, and I think that would fit, right? If you make it's not housing first, if you say this is sober living, right? I mean, there's sober living options. They're just not part of the continuum of care.
Seems like with housing first, you're focusing on the priority of, superficially putting someone in a house. But if it's a person that
Belied by the name
Yeah.
housing first,
But
yeah?
if you want to have, if someone is interested, says, I think that I can become sober if I'm in a house, then they should be, that the priority of the program should be more sobriety instead of just, forced into a housing, and then you would have stricter rules on, what goes on and things like that.
Okay, go ahead.
I think part of it's a policy problem.
Mhm.
Boris Miles once talked about that, and he's, for those of you who don't know, he's like the person that does most of this district here. And he said, it's a really big challenge to get Section 8 housing into middle class areas because people don't want that kind of neighbor. And as a result, what you end up doing is creating pools of lower income, socioeconomically challenged, sobriety challenged people together. So maybe they have a roof over their head, but as you said, it's not really addressing the longer term issue of how do we help them beyond getting to housing.
Right, so housing first, the policy gets people housed, and housing first solves the housing problem. And maybe only temporarily. Maybe only temporarily. Like I said, I don't know anything about rapid rehousing except that I don't work in rapid rehousing because I work in permanent supportive housing. People definitely cycle through our programs, but for this population, they're relatively stable, problems notwithstanding. But Housing First only is housing only deals with housing. Our clients are coming in with a plethora of issues, and that's where our work comes in, right? We're not providing the Section 8 voucher. I didn't go into it, but in my program, all of our clients have Section 8 vouchers. And after a year, in theory, they can take that Section 8 voucher and they can find some other landlord who will accept their Section 8 voucher. Go ahead.
But the thing about the Housing First is
Uh-huh.
it doesn't say or explain how they can maintain employment and all these other factors that they need to have to maintain their housing.
Right. Housing First is only dealing with
just
housing.
getting in the door.
It's only dealing with housing. And what you're voicing is, but it seems to be setting up a series of unintended consequences that make it very difficult for people to stay housed. Yeah.
So then maybe in the policy of Housing First, if you're in an agency that adopts Housing First, what Search had to do is we can't just house people. You have to have an integrated care model to sustain housing. Is what but technically an agency, like you're saying, rapid rehousing can just say, oh, we're doing housing first. But they're doing case management, but if your case management is not focused on servicing the client beyond housing, then you're going to end up with people kind of just falling out.
So you're talking about the support piece that comes after the Housing First piece. And I don't know. So rapid rehousing, it's a federal program, a lot the way that permanent supportive housing is. And different agencies have different rapid rehousing. So Search has we have some staff, I think, who do rapid rehousing. So what agent, do you mind if I ask what agency you're working at?
The Salvation Army.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
You're not Kelsey, are you?
No.
Okay.
That's our coordinator, Cesar. She's the one who interviews and does the questionnaire with the homeless young adults that we have.
Okay.
So she also.
So you're with York?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we're next to each other.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for the digression. I think that you have maybe hit on like a policy, like a big macro policy, like a macro issue about policy, which is that policies are made, let's hope, with the best intentions, and that there's often unintended consequences of the policies, and there's often two sides, right? I think Housing First is a really good model, notwithstanding the problems with rapid rehousing, and notwithstanding the problems of putting somebody into housing. It is very challenging. Like, my clients are very challenging, but that's why I like my job. I mean, if everyone was good, I wouldn't have a job and it wouldn't be interesting. Yeah. What can I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, yeah, that's why I like my job, because it's a challenge. For, everything that you said about people going back to the street, it's totally true, and really what it takes, because I have clients do that all the time. Where Harrisburg is very close to where a lot of my clients lived homeless. So it's very easy for them to go back. It's very easy for them to engage with their old friends. It's very easy for them to invite their friends to come and stay with them. And it takes them some time, but with good engagement from the staff, our clients who used to sleep on the street sleep in their apartments. Who were sleeping in their apartments with a knife under their pillow don't feel they need to do that anymore. I mean, it's slow and it takes time, and this is where your skill as a clinician comes in, engaging them and engaging with them and building rapport with them and working with them to feel like they have a safe place to be in their apartment building. Because a lot of the people that are neighbors were neighbors under 59. And it's not starting like with a clean slate. It's just not. Any other thoughts about Housing First? Because yes.
So how do y'all explain Housing First to, well, I guess I don't know if y'all do that, but Search, like, how do they explain Housing First model to, like, property managers?
So I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
That's not my job. That is the job of a job, like, that's a job that I don't want to have. Mm-hmm. I don't have to explain Housing First to my clients, although sometimes I do, because I run a sober support group, right? And these are, for the most part, not people who came in sober, but some of them are. And they talk about what it's like the challenges for them of living in an apartment building where after 5 o'clock, when the staff is gone and the sort of the day property management staff is gone, like, the party breaks out on the 3rd and 4th floor. It's like, yeah, what do you do? And it's a constant conversation, and we provide a lot of support, and we, 2 Fridays ago took a client out to West Oaks, and we're trying to get him into Open Door Mission, and it's like that's what our job is to work with our clients to help them improve the quality of life as they see it. And if they want to be sober, helping to support that. And it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy for anybody to get sober, ever. Any other questions? Feelings? Feelings are important here. Feelings about Housing First. Okay.